Happy Thursday, December 2nd. Here we are. We're in December. We're like so close to the end of 2021. I'm actually excited. I'm actually excited about the end of the year, and I'm excited about the year to come for many different reasons, but I won't talk about that today. I am excited today about my guest and the topic that we'll be talking about, which is how to heal after being in toxic relationships. And I spoke a little bit about this in my stories earlier this week, where I'm sure that you've been, or I have experienced, we've all had our experience with breakups, whether they were good, bad, but I've noticed from a lot of clients and even from very, very close people in my own personal life that just can't seem to recover when they've had a toxic relationship happen to them. So I'm excited to bring Mushka in because it's something that I've never explored to the fullest. I've always been unlucky in love, but I never was really in toxic relationships. So it'll be interesting to get her insights on this, considering I focus a lot on, teaching you how to be in a healthy, long-term committed relationship. So bringing her in to see how do we heal after a toxic relationship to make sure we don't stay stuck in that rut or that poison, to make sure that we're able to eventually move on and go into a healthy, loving relationship. So I am going to bring her in. Hello, Jason. Okay, Mushka, I'm going to bring you in. I have to request you here. There you go.
Hey.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I am good. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'm super happy to have you, especially that, we have to talk about this, that we actually connected through XXO Connect. So
Yes.
I actually mentioned it a little bit in my stories earlier that Mushka is another amazing person that you can actually benefit and work with through that self-development platform if you haven't already checked it out.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I have my room there every Thursday. I just came from there. So this is
Oh, it's
next.
true.
Yeah, this is next on my list today. And yeah, the same thing over there. I talk all about healing, growth, toxic relationships. And yeah, if you haven't yet signed up, I don't know what you're waiting for. Head
I
over
know,
there.
right? This is like the perfect time, even for Christmas. Like if you're looking for Christmas ideas for your close ones or your friends, great value. Get a membership for your friends at
Yeah.
XXO Connect.
Yeah. And even that, like I know that, everyone waits till January 1st, New Year's to make all their resolutions, which, I have my own ideas about that. But, everyone waits all year to keep these resolutions and to, make these resolutions. And I feel like XXO Connect, that entire platform, will help you accomplish every single goal or resolution that you want. It'll cover everything. Health, fitness, wellness, relationships, dating, whatever you want, it'll cover the entire thing. So I think this is a perfect time to jump on that.
Yes, agreed. I like two high
Yes.
fives.
Yes.
And I mean, the benefit right now is that it's still it's still fairly new. So, I mean, you can have some relatively small rooms or even one-on-one coaching with us, which, the fees usually hourly are expensive.
I know, exactly. I know, get on it now.
Exactly.
Before it becomes so overwhelming and you can't even find yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to be talking today about, a subject that I'm excited about, even though I was like, oh, how can I, be excited about talking about toxic relationship, but it's the healing journey to it. And I thank you for the reminder, because we were going back and forth before our live, and she reminded me how I teach about how to be in relationships. And I think that one of the things that's important that I've seen, and I have a few people that are very close to me that are still not able to recover from what they've had as a toxic relationship. And I want you to even talk about that after when we do your introduction. But it's, how do you evolve from that? How do you get out of that rut? Because a lot of people sit in it and just can't seem to pull out of it. But I've put that in my notes to circle back with you.
Okay.
But I would love for you to introduce yourself and tell us exactly what you do as a therapist. I know you I'll let you do your intros, and then we'll dive into the subject.
Sure. Okay. So I'm a licensed therapist by education. I received my master's in social work, and then I became a licensed therapist. But I specialize in relationship traumas, particularly helping both men and women heal after toxic relationships. And that also ties into being a really big advocate for self-worth and self-love, because I connect them both together, because when we are in toxic relationships, the first thing we lose is usually our sense of self-worth. We've tied our worth so much to these relationships that when it falls apart, our entire worth and value kind of falls apart at the same time. So yeah, I do that. I do one-on-one coaching work, particularly with healing and growth. I also started a women's group, which starts in December 13th. So I'm really excited about that as well. And yeah, just trying to help others really tap into the healing and the growth that is so necessary after the toxic relationships, like you mentioned.
Absolutely. So did you get into this specific niche of focusing on healing in toxic relationships because you've been through a story yourself?
Yeah, so I didn't become a therapist because of what I've been through. I originally became a therapist because of, I guess, just my life situation. I grew up the oldest of 10 kids. My parents were helpers and in the helping healing profession. And so it kind of made sense that I would do something along those lines. Growing up, I would make these pretend therapy sessions with my younger siblings. And so I knew it was going to be some type of the helping, healing world. And then I became a therapist. But about 3 years ago, I did experience some toxic relationships in my life, really kind of shook up everything I knew and forced me to look deep into the healing work. So I started with really going really deep into the inner child work and the healing, and redefining what self-worth meant to me, and then just discovering it. I kind of use discover and rediscover interchangeably, because I was rediscovering, but I feel like in a way I never really discovered it in the first place.
That's interesting.
And I think that's what happens a lot with people who have been in toxic relationships. They lose their sense of self-worth, and so part of healing is tapping into where that worth is and what that worth means to them and their value, but what caused them to get into a toxic relationship in the first place is generally that low sense of self-worth to begin with. So redefining it, and also just defining it from the get-go, what did this ever mean to us? So that was the work that I did for myself. Thankfully, it's been an incredible journey that I now can help others with along the way.
Well, I always say there's no better teacher than somebody that's been through it itself, right? I always give the example of birthing. I'm not a mother. I will never be able to understand what it's like to give birth. So I think there's a huge asset talking to someone that's been through it themselves. So when we talk about, a toxic relationship, what would you give as a definition of toxic relationship? I know it can be many different things to many different people, but when we're saying, because there's bad relationship, but not necessarily, I wouldn't categorize it, because I've never really experienced a toxic relationship for the say. I've had my ups and downs and just bad relationships that I knew weren't for me, but they weren't for say toxic. So how would you describe what is a toxic relationship?
Yeah, well, I mean, I know that you talk about being in a healthy relationship. So in a way, it's kind of all the opposite of all of that. But to tell people, if your relationship isn't healthy, then there's something totally wrong with it. Then, I don't always think that's the case, because I do feel like some toxic relationships can change and can become healthy, if you're both willing to do that. I would say that toxic relationships include an array of things, like you could be going through addiction, mental illness that can affect the relationship into becoming toxic, leading into things like gaslighting, narcissism, control, manipulation. But for the person experiencing it on the other end of it, I think that feeling of not feeling safe, knowing that there's something going on, there's something wrong, knowing that there's something off with your intuition and with your gut, but there is definitely something going on, you're just not listening to it. Things like feeling that you always need to be apologized to, that things are always going wrong, and you feel like you always need an apology for something that's being said or something that's being done to you. In a healthy relationship, you shouldn't need apologies all that often,
Yeah, I agree. Interesting. So I guess, if at any point, would you say somebody that has done the work, like, I'm just wondering if for somebody, and I'll use myself an example, if I was going to get into a toxic relationship, I don't think I would actually tolerate it, because I know I've done the work, so I've learned to do my self-love and self-worth. So would you say typically being in a toxic relationship, the number one syndrome that the person tends to have is self-worth issues, basically?
Yeah, I would say that, yeah. And I would say someone like you, just from what I know of you and speaking to you, it sounds like you have really strong communication skills, you understand boundaries, you understand yourself, you know your value. Like, all of those things really define who you are as a person, to not get into that situation, but to stand up if you were ever presented in that situation.
Absolutely. And I mean, that didn't come naturally. It was through a lot of failed relationships and a lot of healing, as you say. But I agree, learning to, this is something that I teach as well before you go. A part of being in a healthy, loving relationship is stating your boundaries, as you clearly said, and learning to stay true to who you are, because it's so easy when we are on the quest of searching for the one or a relationship that we desire so badly, to kind of get lost if we like someone, and very quickly accommodate or compromise ourselves, which ends up, not working out in the long run. So what anybody that would come to you after being in a toxic relationship, because you do a lot of the healing, so what would be some of the initial healing methods that you incorporate and do with your clients?
So firstly, we do a lot of mindfulness work, so really tapping into that inner self, things like meditation, gratitude, mindfulness, journaling, that's like the umbrella of everything, because I find that mindfulness is like at the core of who we are, being mindful of who we are, what we are, our thoughts, our beliefs, our values, our feelings, like really tapping into that. So, I feel like that's at the root of everything. And then things like rewriting your story, rewriting your narrative, getting out of that self-pity, victim mode. It's so easy. It's so comfortable to be sitting there. That's what I think holds people back from either leaving the relationship or admitting there's something wrong with the relationship, because it's so comfortable. It's like, poor me, this is just what I'm stuck with. I'll just hang out here. It's so easy. They know what's on the other side of that. They know they're going to have to wake up and do some really hard work to face their reality. And people just sit in it because it's that much easier. So it's, breaking through all of that, getting over things like shame and guilt, because shame, yes. And I'm sure you see this a lot with, people just trying to be in healthy relationships, like from being in a place where you can't have those healthy relationships, or you're not able to understand what a healthy relationship is, I think it's that shame that holds you back from either sharing it with anyone else, feeling like you're worthless. Like, how did I get into that situation? I can't tell anyone about it. Nobody can ever know that I had a part in this, and it really holds you back from whatever the next step will be.
Yeah.
So working through things like shame and guilt, getting the proper support, being able to share. A lot of times we've been made to be manipulated and controlled and gaslit in a way where we can't really tap into how we're feeling and thinking. So learning how to share vulnerably, comfortably in a safe space, especially in my group, which I'm, hopefully I feel like that's going to encourage people to also be able to do that, because you isolate in a way. Like, it's all about you, the relationship, keeping faith in this relationship, keeping it all together. And so pushing it beyond what that could look like.
Yeah, and there's so much power in the share, right? Because oftentimes we think we're alone, or we're just, or as you say, especially when you're sitting in feelings of shame or guilt, you're just like, what are people going to say? What are people going to think? And then you hear other people share and you're like, wow, not only am I not the only one, but there are some people that have a worse situation than I do. So I loved what you said about rewriting your story, because I'm a true believer on that. We even talked about it on the live last week, where, who you were yesterday doesn't determine who your outcome tomorrow. And I would say, like, how do you, if a customer, like, I'm thinking of somebody specific in my head that just does not want to rewrite the story. They just want to stay stuck in that shit. And I have a question just on the sideline here quickly. Do you find that men and women will kind of deal with that differently on getting out of that narrative? It is my assumption from what I've experienced that when men get hurt, it really, really hurts. Women, as crazy as we are, a little bit more emotional, we seem to be able to get over it a little bit quicker. I don't know if I'm generalizing here, but I'm curious to get your insight on that. And what do you say to a client that comes to you and just doesn't want to get out of that narrative? Like, how do you help them through that, or can you?
Yeah. Well, firstly, 100% I see a difference. And I like to talk about this a lot because I want to normalize it, that men also experience really hurt feelings and experience sadness and anger and shame and guilt the same way that a woman does. But we don't normalize that. We don't speak to that as much and I think also men internalize that as they're not perceived as, like, emotional or weak or anything like that. They feel like they have to put on this brave front. And so when they have to go and admit, like, I was in a toxic relationship, let's say we're talking about, a man and a female partner, to say I was in a toxic relationship with a female partner and she manipulated me and they have to own to this inferiority that they're not used to, or at least not perceived in the world. So I think it's really hard for them to admit it or to really own it as much as women do. Women are at the face of, like, emotional abuse and toxic relationships. Like, you generally go straight to thinking about a woman in a toxic relationship. Yeah. So I think it is a lot harder for men. But then going back to how to help a client who comes to you with that, like, if they're stuck and they can't really get out of that, I would say just working through the beginning of the story, going as far back as you can to identify some of the patterns and some of the cycles in their relationships or in their behaviors that led them into this, because I don't like to say that, we're bound to end up with certain types of people. I know it's a whole series of events, but I do think that understanding where their story comes from and kind of what some of those patterns are. Like, do you have a pattern of saying yes to people too much? Do you have a pattern of, not putting in boundaries when someone wants you to do something? Do you have a pattern of being stuck with emotionally unavailable partners, and getting them to see it? Because you can say it as much as you want, and they are super, super stuck, that nothing is going to help them get out of it. You just have to show it. Like, you have to give them the proof in a way. Like, they have to see the proof enough that'll wake them up and be like, oh, yes, like, this is my life and I've got to get out of it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It's, I always say there's, I'm trying to be, because I've always been, I can sit in my shit, you know, we all have our days that we can, but I'm always the eternal optimistic of like, okay, like there's more. It doesn't, as I said, it doesn't determine who you are. And I mean, I've failed consistently for over 15 years in my relationships, but I always knew in the back of my head, I was like, one day the right thing, the right person will come to me. I always knew it kind of instinctively. And obviously a lot of work came through that, and a lot of healing and understanding exactly what you explained, where my patterns and behaviors come from, and all my wounds as well, which are typically related to childhood. And, you know, most of us don't even know it until later in life, or if you do therapy. And I was like, damn, I wish I would have known this sooner.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So what you've mentioned meditating and a whole piece of mindfulness. What are the other forms of healing work that you do with some of your clients, or that you would recommend people? So if people are starting their journey on their own, they're not yet consulting a therapist whatsoever. And I'm thinking of this friend that just can't seem to get out of their rut, and they don't really want to get the help. Like, what do you do?
I mean, are you saying they don't want to get the help, but they know there's a problem?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I have clients like that come to me week after week with the same story. And half the time I just want to shake them and be like, do you not hear what you're telling me? You know, because to us, it's usually so clear when you see somebody's patterns, or you see somebody's relationship, and you see how stuck they are, and you're telling them what to look for or what's going on, and they're just not seeing it, or they're just comfortable being stuck, I guess. But it's very hard for them to actually do something about it. So if they want to be stuck and they're in this relationship, I think it just, if you have any type of say, but like, support them in where they're at. And I've also said this to people who have come to me and said, like, my friend is in a toxic relationship, but she doesn't see it. Like, what can I do? And I would say just, support anyone that you know who is in a toxic relationship, because one day they may come to you when things get really bad, and, you'll want to still be on their side. So, validate how they feel through things, but just still be there for them. Don't kind of dismiss what they're experiencing. But for somebody who is in a relationship, in a toxic relationship, is stuck, doesn't want to do anything, but knows about it, that's a good one, because those people don't come to me because
they don't want help.
Yeah, they don't want help. They don't want help, but they know that they need the help, and I think it's just them discovering something on their own to the point where they realize they need the help. So, eventually maybe they'll be reading books, they'll come across some type of book. I've been reading this book called The Highly Sensitive Person's Guide to Toxic Relationships, I think. Mm-hmm. And that's something, like, I remember reading about highly sensitive persons like years back, but if I would have found this book, I would have been like, no way, this is me and this is the help I need. But I do believe that a lot of books that I've read in the past kind of indicated certain things, like, to look out for in my relationships, and at least, like, changes to make. So, like, learning how to say no more, identifying things like gaslighting, to know when, I know that's a big thing that people talk about, or seem to talk about these days, but if you feel like you're being made crazy, do you want me to say what gaslighting is?
I was just gonna say.
Yeah. So I don't know. I just feel like everyone and their mother is talking about gaslighting
I
these
know.
days.
I'm like, where the hell did that come out of? And I'm like,
Yeah.
what exactly does that mean? So perfect. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So gaslighting, I think originally came from a movie where they were driving in a car in this movie, and the they were in a movie or something, and the guy told his wife or his girlfriend that there's no lights no lights in the city, but she saw the light, or I don't know, it came from something. But basically it means that you kind of cover up your story to make you seem like you're right and the other person is crazy. So you'll say things like, it's crazy making. Another word to say it is crazy making. So let's say you'll say, the toxic person will say, you know, let's go out at 10, right? And then I'll say, okay, yeah, I'll be ready at 10. It'll come to 12, and you'll say, wait, I thought we're going out at 10. And they'll say, no, I never said 10. I said we're going out at 2. So it's making you feel crazy now. Like, wait a second. You know, you start doubting yourself, you start doubting the other person, and you're like, I was pretty sure this was my reality, but now I'm doubting that reality, you know?
Exactly.
And yeah, so it's things that are like, so it can be things that are so clear cut, like black and white. Like somebody could tell you the sky is gray, and they're constantly manipulating you and gaslighting you, and they'll tell you the sky's, you know, yellow or something, and then you'll say, yeah, you're right. Yeah, I see yellow, because you're so stuck in whatever this lie of reality is in the relationship. Yeah. You know, and it goes even to the extent of like emotions, you know, like they'll say you'll cry, and they'll say, you know, you're always so emotional, and then you'll say, I confused myself. But basically, I'm getting confused with the they and the you.
It's a form of being manipulated.
Yes,
like,
yes.
On a narcissistic front, like if
100%.
It's like, woohoo, I'm always right, you're crazy, whatever. So
yes, yeah.
Okay, so good. Thank you for clarifying. So now we all know what gaslighting is all about. So signs to look out for toxic relationships, especially when you're starting into it. So let's kind of like flip it this way. What do people need to pay attention to before they find themselves in a toxic relationship? So the signs that you will be in a toxic relationship. So gaslighting definitely is like a lot of red flags. It's like, woo, manipulation. What else?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I would say, like, you know, if actually before a toxic relationship gets really toxic, there's that honeymoon period, kind of like in that cycle of abuse as well, where you'll feel so in love and so obsessed, and they'll treat you like a queen or a king, you know, because they want you and they can attach themselves to you and either your personality or your behaviors. And so you're basically an easy target in a way. So they know they'll get to you, and they just first have to shower you with all that love and kindness, but you won't know it then. Eventually, it'll slowly start with things like little lies, little bits of controlling what you say, controlling what you do. If you're in public and you're trying to talk in a conversation, and then they'll say something like, no, wait, no, you didn't say that to me, or, you know, like correcting you in public to put you down, belittle you. So it starts with those like very minor things. Eventually, it turns into things like manipulating you into thinking and believing differently than what you know is true. Then the gaslighting, where you're at that level where you don't even know your reality. You're feeling crazy. You know you can't tell right from wrong anymore. You know you've changed. And I think also that I think like people feel like a lot of like mental health issues come into play as well, a lot of anxiety. You start to get very paranoid about other people noticing your relationships, paranoid within your relationship as well, what your partner's going to do, what he's going to say, where they're going to be at, you know. Fear eventually, you know, if it becomes abusive in a way, like physically, emotionally, sexually, you can fear what that will look like. But yeah, just those little things that play a part into a bigger picture. Also, yeah, and I was saying about like the mental health kind of aspect of it, the anxiety, but then also feeling very depressed, very down, feeling unloved, unlovable, crying a lot,
Well, I guess,
isolating.
yeah. So I guess that's where that whole component of feeling low self-esteem,
Yeah,
self-worth comes in,
yeah,
because you kind of like are acceptant of these kinds of behaviors, or all of a sudden kind of like got wheeled into it, not really realizing it. But at the end of the day, if you would have had self-worth, I don't think you would
yeah.
have probably got trapped. And I say that, and I mean, I see it all the time with some clients that they still do, because they get trapped into the fantasy of, wanting to have found their person.
Yeah.
So,
And especially during that honeymoon period, like when things seem all lovey-dovey and it's like, this is the relationship I was looking for, especially also if you're prone to a cycle of unhealthy relationships. And so you finished one unhealthy relationship, let's say it was abusive, manipulative, there was infidelity, lying, and then you think, okay, I found someone else. This is the one. He treats me amazing. He buys me gifts. He sends me flowers. Like everything is so perfect in this relationship. I know this is gonna be it. And then slowly, slowly, the pattern repeats itself, and you can't get out of it again.
so what do you suggest that the people do to avoid that? One of the exercises that I suggest is always identify those past behaviors. And I'm like, even put them on the wall
Yeah.
and write it, everything that didn't service you in past relationships, and who do you need to be or become going forward when you start dating somebody new, and make sure that you don't repeat that. And as soon as you start repeating it, it's like ding, 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 green light to say, okay, I need to pay attention. So what else do you suggest from that perspective?
Yeah. So I suggest, because I have a lot of my clients are afraid to be alone, and they're afraid
Mm.
to feel lonely. They think being single means that there's something wrong with them and what other people will perceive them as. And so I recommend that after a relationship ends, do some type of work, whether it's therapy, coaching, reading, like intense journaling and mindfulness. Spend some time being alone,
Yeah.
being without someone else, to to see to kind of get over what went wrong in that last relationship, because you're going to end up in those same patterns unless you do something about it. So yeah, seeing, as hard as it is for people to hear this, see where you went wrong. Not what
Mm-hmm.
the other person did, because we know and we see 100% what the other person did wrong. See where you went wrong. See where you didn't stand up for yourself. See where you could have said something and you didn't. See where you didn't put in boundaries. See that time that they got the better of you and manipulated you. See where your part is, and spend that time before jumping into the next relationship, because chances are it will be the same thing. And it'll be a different person, but you and they will have the same pattern.
Correct. Why do you think we have such difficulty owning our own shit? We're so good at blaming everything on the other, or saying, why do you think it's hard for us to be introspective or assume our part in the role as well?
I mean, even with all the work that I've done and the healing and the therapy and everything that I do every day, I still have a really hard time owning where I'm wrong. I like to put everything on everyone else. Like I'm doing my work. I'm doing great over here. Let them go figure it out. It's very hard. And I think a lot of it is, that ego. Like we are so good. We are doing the work. They're not. We deserve to be happy and not have to worry, and they do. And I think also shame, we don't want to feel guilty that we have a part in things. We don't want to hold on to that shame, like, oh, is there, like, what are people going to say or think when they see that we possibly have a part in doing wrong? And I think it's harder for people who have done the work to
Yeah.
know that there's something wrong, like to know that they have a part in it, because, you spend hours and hours and years possibly on, and moving through those really hard feelings and memories, and you want to pretend at a certain point that it's not you anymore.
Agreed. And, to your point, it's something that I've worked on a lot, is always question when I'm being triggered, or, because I'm such a control freak, and it's helped me in a lot of ways through my life. But I always say any good quality can become a fault, and vice versa. So I've been able to create such awareness, and I'm not saying that it's not easier, or sometimes I do get my moments, but I can catch myself and say, Chantal, what's the matter right now? Are you not getting what you want, how you want, the way you want it? Is it really worth it getting into an argument with this person because you want to be right? And is it really going to change anything at the end of the day? And it's hard, but it's made such a huge difference in all of my relationships, whether that's at home, with friends, even with my family and my mother, God bless her heart, where I say, take a step back, get in observation mode instead of reacting.
Yeah.
But man, it's not always easy. But I definitely think that it's a practice, and it's a muscle that I think that we can develop, that is really worth it at the end of the day. It pays off in so many different areas.
Yeah, definitely. I think,
Go ahead.
I also think that your triggers are really at the root of a lot of your reactions. Like, you could be triggered by something, and you're going to react based on, let's say, your inner child or some type of memory. But if you identify, like, where that trigger is really coming from, and what it really brings out for you, you will react in the, let's say, like, the way that you are in the present, not react the way that the trigger has made you feel, a month ago, 5 years ago. So I think that's also, like, that's a really big part for me, but also for people in toxic relationships, to know that your triggers play a huge part in the outcome of your conversations, your situations, your relationships.
I agree. So could you give a concrete example in toxic relationship that this would, just so the audience can understand? Because I agree, that's such a great point that you brought on. So what would be a great example
of a trigger?
In a toxic relationship?
In a toxic relationship. So I would, let's say you have a partner who is really, who is manipulative usually, and does, put you down. But let's say they would say something like, you're a terrible mother, or you don't know how to take care of the kids. And so you will get really angry at the person because it hurts. That's an insult. But where it really might stem from is, as a child, your mother wasn't there for you. You didn't have a mother figure. You didn't see your mom treat you the way that you're trying to treat your children. You're working so hard to be there for your children, and your toxic partner is just criticizing you and insulting you because he's emotionally abusive, they're emotionally abusive, and you don't believe that's true right now, and you can't stand up for yourself, saying, I don't think that's true. I'm trying as hard as I can. Instead, you either shut down because you're so used to this abuse, or you yell back, and you get all defensive. But really, what it's getting at is that inner child who has seen what a mother not doing anything, or a useless mother looks like, and you're trying so hard not to be like that.
Got it. So I guess it's important in the healing after toxic relationships to identify all those triggers, and do the work with the inner child, as you said at the beginning, as that's a super key. key
All right.
component. So you also mentioned, and I want to explore this at the beginning, that you help people heal after toxic relationship, but you also help people in toxic relationship heal together. And you were saying that, you know, some relationship can end up. So how does that work?
So I wouldn't say it's uncommon, but it's not super common. And I would say the only way that it could work is if both partners, or, you know, let's say we're talking about a toxic friendship or a toxic family member, both of the parties have to be willing to work and have to be willing to make a change. Yes.
Yeah, it's the
One
word, willing.
one can't force the other. One can't assume the other. They both have to be willing and ready to make a change. And I think it's more so with things like addiction and mental illness, you know, like a lot of severe mental illness can get in the way of a relationship and kind of like, you know, turn it toxic. Somebody can become very aggressive and manipulative. But then let's say they get help for their mental illness, and that can work out some of the relationship issues, and then together they can heal all the trauma that was brought up in the relationship. Same with addiction. If somebody chooses to, you know, get sober or, you know, healthy in their addiction, and so that particularly doesn't present itself in the relationship, but there's still the traumas that are brought, that together they need to heal through that.
Yeah, that's a good example. So what would you suggest to anybody that's in a current toxic relationship that is with a partner that suffers from addiction, mental issues, that, you know, there's a part of them that they feel guilty, they need to stick there to leave. They can't, because they know they can't leave that person to their circumstance. And for me, that's very, very toxic, because you talk about the willingness of two people coming together to help each other heal or wanting to work on their relationship. But if the other person is not even able to contain or save their own selves, what do you suggest to people to do in those cases?
I think, you know, addiction and mental illness is like a whole different category of toxic relationships, because we do see people who can change with something like that, whereas something like narcissistic personality disorder, very, very hard to change someone like that, or I mean, for them to change or to see it, it's very, very hard. Whereas mental illness and addiction, people can usually notice the impact that it has on their partner, their relative, their friend, and so they might be willing to work on that. You know, usually with addiction, there is some type of like rock bottom. Hopefully you don't get to that, but that, you know, there's like a wake up call that makes you realize you need help or you're about to lose everything. Similar in mental illness, where, you know, let's say you have major depression and you know you need help, or you're having panic attacks and you know you need to seek help, and usually a doctor or a therapist or somebody will guide you in the right direction. But for somebody who is in a relationship with, you know, somebody who has a mental illness or an addiction, you're holding out hope that they will change because they'll identify whatever their problem is, you know. So you don't want to leave, or you don't want to, let's say, you know, abandon them when they really need you, because you think maybe things will change and maybe it's up to you to help them or to lead them in the right direction. But at the same time, how long can you hold out hope for? You know, if they're treating you like crap and they're, you know, let's say it gets to the point where you have a alcoholic partner and they're abusing you and, you know, yelling at you and the kids, how much can you really endure to hold out that there will be some type of light at the end of it?
Yeah, that must be a hard decision. And I mean, that's where I would encourage to get help and support with a coach or a group that you created. And yeah, that's because I hear those stories all the time, right? Especially when there's kids involved, people don't want to leave their family. So that's good to hear. So we're already 45 minutes in. I always try to keep these under 40 minutes and it never works.
Well, yeah, I mean, and this is just talking about toxic relationships. Like you're on the other end of it where all you do is help people get into healthy relationships. And I think, the goal of healing after a toxic relationship or healing in a toxic relationship is to get to that healthy relationship, help
Yeah.
them get into another healthy relationship, break the pattern of unhealthy relationships. And then there's you on the other end where it's like, this is a come into this healthy relationship and this is what it needs to look like. So, where does that all come in?
Yeah, exactly. And I would say a lot of our work is mutual where, it's self-worth. I mean, the day that I finally attracted, the right man for me was the day that I sat into my self-worth 100%. And I had never realized to what extent I lacked self-worth. I was like, wow. And I'll always remember the day I had the epiphany. I was like, oh my God, I'm fishing at the bottom of the sea. I'm not fishing at the top here. And everything changed from there. When you just step into that power, I always say it's amazing. Everything around you changes because your energy changes. So you won't attract the same kind of person. Those people that are typically, bottom feeders or take advantage of you won't be, energetically, they know they won't be able to fuck around anymore. It just doesn't work. So, and then, identifying those triggers and those past behaviors or patterns and knowing where they're born from to, be aware of them as soon as any kind of situation happens, as you said. So what would you say I know you talked a lot about mindfulness. What would you say are best practices to recover coming out of a toxic relationship to make sure it doesn't happen again? And I mean, this could be anything from, books that you've read, or your top 5 best practices to recover from a toxic relationship.
Yeah, so top 5. I would say, yes, books. There are great books out there. There's, like I said, The Highly Sensitive Person's Guide to Toxic Relationships.
Mm-hmm.
That was a huge mind opener for me because it was like it brought the best of both worlds, the sensitive person side of it, because that is, that for some people that is a huge reason as to why they attract these types of personalities.
Yeah.
But then second, I would say gratitude. Because when you're in a toxic relationship or after a toxic relationship, you feel all the hard feelings, you feel so much sadness, grief, you can't seem to find anything good in your life. And gratitude forces you to find something. And you can start off like, I don't call it dumb, but the things that the things that people say you don't really need to write, where you say like, I have food to eat, or I have a roof over my head. And some people are like, oh, everyone has a roof, but no, focus in on that. You are grateful. Yes. Another thing I would say, words of affirmation. So so waking up in the morning and saying one statement to start with. So things like, I am lovable, I am worthy. And then joined into that, like also looking in the mirror and smiling at yourself, just to see what you look like and feel like when you're happy and you're joyful.
And I agree with that because this is something I still practice, or I have this sometimes that you're good, I'm like, ah, whatever. And I've slid, and this is actually recent. A couple months ago, this was a practice I had stopped doing affirmations, and actually Miriam that is on the live and that we did our live together, reiterated that you should get back into affirmations. And I started, and it's unbelievable the energy difference that it's done. It's crazy. And this is like 7 days of practice. So yes, I am so with you with affirmations, and especially looking at yourself in the mirror with a smile. Like, I love that. That's such a great practice. And sometimes people, you know, my clients will always say, I feel silly and whatever. I'm like, I don't give a shit. Repeat it, record your voice, repeat it when you're walking on the street. There's nothing better because it reprograms the brain, basically, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And for so long, you've been feeding yourself the opposite statement. You've been telling yourself, you know, I am so worthless, I'm so unlovable, nobody will ever want me. You know, and I see, yeah, she wrote affirmations are powerful.
Yes.
They completely transform how you feel and how you see yourself.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, that's a huge one. I would also say like meditation, like guided meditations, where if you don't feel comfortable saying these affirmations, at least hearing 5 minutes, 2 minutes of somebody, you know, like saying it to you, that way that you can, you know, it'll go into your brain, but you don't have to really make the effort of getting it in there. That can also be really helpful. And I would say just reach out to friends or family, anyone that you have in your corner. You don't have to share what you're going through. You don't have to share if you're feeling the shame and you're feeling, you know, like just the grief still, but at least be open about anything else, you know, just talk, because I think that toxic, yeah, I think, you know, the toxic, being in that toxic relationship, you become so isolated, not only physically, but also in your mind. You become, you know, you become really isolated in how you think and how you feel. And so it holds you back from feeling comfortable and sharing with other people and getting all of that out of your head. So I would say practice just sharing, you know, whether it's, you know, the weather or the, you know, what you ate for breakfast, but just practice talking to other people and sharing with other people so that you can eventually learn to trust again.
I agree. That's a big part that I remember having to learn myself is vulnerability. You know, my friend had told me at one point, she's like, Chantal, if you can't be vulnerable with your own friends, how are you going to be vulnerable in a relationship, which is something that's required if you want to be in a healthy, committed relationship. So I totally agree with that. You know, and you know what, Jamie, good for you, man. If you enjoy toxic relationships, crazier the better. Good for you. Enjoy them.
Yeah, someone's gonna have it. Yeah. Some people like that craziness, you know, where life just is different every day. Spice it up if that's what you got to do, you know.
Yeah, I agree. And some people love that. And it's I listen. I no judgment. So enjoy him.
I'll send some people your way.
Okay, and then we have just finished writing a book, Finding Your Voice, Words of Affirmations. Yeah, that's awesome. What's going to be the name of their book, Michelle? I work with victims and survivors. Oh, yeah, that's a big one. So I find an Aries feels. There's always entertainment, let me tell you. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. So we're going to wrap this up. So could you, obviously I'm going to share your information at the bottom of the feed once I post our live together. But what do you have right now in your office? When is your group starting, and who can reach out? How can they reach out? And any information that you want to share, go for it.
Sure, thanks. So I'm here on Instagram. My name is Heal with Mushka. I'm also on LinkedIn as Mushka Gurevitch if you're over there. But for now, you can reach out to me either LinkedIn or Instagram message, and you know, DM me and I can get back to you there. My December group is full. I am going to see how it runs and maybe open one in January or either at the end of December. But for now, I just do one-on-one coaching work. We have weekly, bi-weekly for some people. And yeah, it's just getting you through to complete healing.
So do you do mixed groups typically, or is it just you like to work with one?
Yeah, so right now it's just my December group is just women. Okay. I wanted to test how it's my first group, you know, ever. So I wanted to test how that would go with, you know, just women feeling that support from other women, because every woman in that group is is a victim of toxic romantic relationships from a male partner. So I just wanted to keep that, sort of a safe space for them. Eventually, we'll see down the line different types of groups. But for now, yeah, that's it. But really, I'm just doing one-on-one work. I'm working on a program to make it more structured rather than just like, weekly sessions, but we'll get to that.
Yes, there's always something in the pipeline, right?
Yes.
Never done. And also your Thursday room on XXO Connect. If you guys end up taking a membership, feel free to join her room or mine. So,
Yes.
Mushka, it's been such
When are you? You're on Tuesday, right?
I'm on Tuesday, yeah.
You're on Tuesdays, okay. And I'm on Thursdays. And yeah, hope to see you all there.
Exactly. So it's been so wonderful to talk to you and get to know more about what you do. And I truly, truly am grateful that you do what you do, because a lot of people need a lot of healing coming out of toxic relationship or experiencing them. So, I mean, I think that if you, which I always say, just be open to trying all this kind of work. And why sit in your shit when you can free yourself of it, right? It's just like, thank you, Jamie. Thank you for your share and spicing up that conversation.
Yes, you've made me think. I'm thinking.
Exactly. Maybe one day he'll come a customer. So, but keep doing what you're doing. I'm so grateful. The one thing that has been amazing through this whole pandemic and Clubhouse and all these online platforms is getting to know and discover all the different healers out there, including yourself. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Likewise. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I will see you in one of the rooms. Have a great afternoon.
I will see you. You too. Bye.
Bye, guys. Bye, guys. Thank you for tuning in.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.